Father, Son, Holy Spirit. The parable of the rich young man, not the parable, the teaching, the incident in the Lord's life, has 5 distinct elements. First of all, he comes to the Lord and asks him questions like you would a rabbi, as a moral teacher. The points of the law. And the Lord responds to him step by step in that manner. But when the man persists, he goes the step above. Sell all that you have, give to the poor, you'll have treasure in heaven, and come follow me. Sell all and give to the poor is a distinct element. The statement, come follow me. This incident is in all 3 synoptic gospels, and one of the others says, take up your cross and follow me. It adds that statement. And then when the young man misses the opportunity, he does not respond. The Lord then proceeds to say that it would be easier for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, but completes it by saying, with man it's impossible, but with God all things are possible. He's articulating here the principle of non-possession, of renouncing family and property as an aid to following the gospel life most completely. To focus completely on following the commandments of Christ, which is what the monastic life is. St. John Chrysostom in his writings describes how when he was a young man working in the government of the Byzantine Empire with a promising career in the civil service, he heard this commandment or this incident read in church. He immediately resigned his position, gave everything away, and went to the monastery and started that life. That's interesting. When Deaconessa Irene and I got married in our 30s and started our family, moved here to help start the mission, we had friends in that same period of years that went to the monasteries. And we've been there many times. And there's a power to it. It's definite. But that first half, giving all you have to the poor, has to be connected to come follow me. One without the other is empty. It's interesting, you can look up online Christian Socialists. They actually exist. They say that the followers of Christ were social agitators for the leveling of hierarchy and the redistribution of wealth. They take the first half, but the come follow me, I think they miss. But that's a direct application, is to that renunciation. Blessed Theophylact, in his commentaries on the Gospels, which is a synopsis of commentary by the Church Fathers, says that what this means is to take all we have, sell all we have, and give to the poor, means to take our sinful, passionate nature, give it back to the demons from where it came. Their poverty is in lacking any godly virtue. This is the essence of the Christian life. And the come follow me part is the essence of this whole passage. But it has application, broad application, for those who are not renouncing family and property. When we go to illustrate this, it's a passage in Luke chapter 8, verses 2 and 3. And certain women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities, Mary called Magdalene, out of whom went 7 devils, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, and Susanna, and many others, who ministered unto him from their substance. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward. We look in biblical history, Herod was one of the wealthiest men in the Roman Empire. His steward was his business and financial manager. If Herod we could think of as a billionaire, his steward would be a multimillionaire. Joanna, his wife, was a wealthy woman in her own right, and she aided the ministry of Christ with that substance, as it's called. And we read the lives of the saints. There are many cases of young people who have inherited wealth or earned wealth, who give it all away and live as paupers. Many examples, but there are also examples of kings, queens, and those who've earned and inherited wealth that built churches, monasteries, schools, orphanages, hospitals, every describable philanthropic work. So it's the essence of this teaching that we go for. Come follow me. And to understand it better, we go to the principle of stewardship, that we are not the owners of what we have. We are the stewards. In the parable of the talents, the king gives his servants a certain number of talents, and when he returns, they have increased the talents and give them back. Here, this is what I've done with what you've given me. In the case of the young man, not only did he possess it, his goods, but they possessed him. And with that possession came attachment to the passions, the passionate nature. To illustrate these principles, I'm going to use Elder Porphyrios of Greece. The elder died in 1991. He was canonized by the church as a saint in 2013. He was one of the most unusual modern saints that I've ever read the life of. Born in 1906, very poor family, very poor village in Greece. Went to the village school for 1 year. Had to go out and start working at the age of 8. Very common at the time. He wanted to be a monk. At the age of 13, he made it to Mount Athos, which is covered with monasteries, men's monasteries. Was taken in by 2 monks who formed him and trained him in the monastic life. At the age of 19, he came down with pleurisy, terrible lung condition. And a local monk who'd been a doctor in his former life nursed him back to health and said, he can't stay here. The ascetic life is too harsh for him. He needs milk and eggs and nutritious food to gain his health back. So he had to leave. He went to a little monastery next to his home village. And he did get better, and he tried to go back, and every time he'd go back, his condition would deteriorate again. He realized he couldn't come back to Mount Athos. So he went back to that little monastery, and pretty soon the local bishop discovered him, saw his qualities, and ordained him a priest at the age of 19, very rare. And 3 years later, made him a confessor. In Greece, only assigned priests hear confessions. Unlike here, there's a lot more priests. So it's not like you're missing out. But from the time he was made a confessor, the people lined up out the door. He became known as a knower of souls. He had spiritual sight and spiritual insight that was profound. After 10 years, he got the inspiration. I'm synopsizing here, giving you a thumbnail sketch. This little book we've got, it's in the bookstore, gives you a much fuller picture. But he got the desire to be a chaplain in a leper colony or a tuberculosis sanatorium. Couldn't find one, went around. There was no openings. He found an opening in the hospital in Athens, big general hospital, attached to this medical school, attached to the university. And by a miracle, he got the job because he was being competed by priests with theological degrees, well-known, years of experience. He got the job. And his gifts blossomed. And people came. and he was seen in the wards going from bed to bed. He healed souls. There were many physical healings that took place. That's happened all throughout his life. But the people describe that the healing happened from the inside out. He entered into their life, entered into their person, helped them correct, and grace moved. He wanted some peace and quiet from the city, so he went outside the city and he found in a forest an abandoned little skeet, a little church with cells. And his parents, his sister, and his niece needed help, so he brought them there. And he loved to pray at night. He could pray in the church. And he started 3 little businesses. I don't know how little. He bought a knitting machine. They learned how to make sweaters. And they made sweaters, and they prospered. And over time, they bought more machines and hired employees. He raised chickens. He said he only had room for 1,000. That was an interesting statement. A commercial poultry operation. And he taught himself how to make incense. He made and sold incense. But the reason he did all of this, because he had a salary at the hospital on top of it, is he had a vision of building a monastery outside the city that was a true spiritual hospital. And this is what he said to his biographers, who he was narrating to, about this. My dream for the monastery was for it to exist in a state of paradise, for services and confessions to take place 24 hours a day, for there to be lots of priests and confessors so that they could alternate, just like doctors on duty in a hospital, so that people wounded by various afflictions of body and soul and by the injuries of sin could come there at any time of day or night, for there to be a telephone which would be answered day and night by the sisters, so that they could offer comfort to all those brought to despair by the various traumas of life and lead them by their words to Christ, the great Comforter, so that in this way their souls might be saved and filled with the heavenly light which divine grace would give them. Many of the sick would become well through the grace of God. The place he was living was owned by a neighboring monastery, and despite his offers, they wouldn't sell it to it. So he looked for years for land around Athens. Didn't say how many years, but eventually he found it. And he was able to buy it. And he bought adjoining plots. That was an ambitious project because Athens is full of churches and there are a number of monasteries around there, many of them centuries old. But his vision was different, the true hospital for souls. And he had a group of women coalesced around him. He started a sisterhood to populate this and build this monastery. It took him 5 years to get approval from the local archbishop to build a new church. I look at this, and this relates to our passage today about the rich young man and the eye of the needle. I'm wondering, how much money did he save up from running 3 businesses plus his hospital salary? Because I know, I have a sense of what land costs, what construction costs. It's always way too much. And because there was all these other monasteries around, he couldn't go around. He did solicit donations from those who followed him. But I wouldn't be surprised if he earned and saved hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's another fascinating thing about him. He was attached to the university, and he used to sit in classes and read their books. And when he was on his describes when he's on his deathbed or in his failing health in his last few years, scholars and scientists would come to him to talk, along with carloads of people to give confessions. And he would talk to these scholars at the highest level of their field and then go beyond. Just like Christ went beyond with this rich young man. Divine wisdom came in, and they would come out in shock because they were the best in their field. For this man who was unlearned, just like at Pentecost, how do these men know these things? Or when the Lord was in the temple as a boy, speaking to the scribes and the elders, how does this man know these things? He's unlearned. And the one that they described in his biography was an astrophysicist. I met one once. He was the father of a PhD student, Russian PhD student at the U of O, in our very early days here at the mission. And he explained that at their yearly symposiums, it was the same 100 faces. If you're not a genius, don't bother going into astrophysics. So here's one of these genius level people, and the elder said, "Oh, Dr. So-and-so, yes, I've read your books." And they had a conversation on that high level. And then he said, "By the way, your theory in this book about this, that's not right. It's actually this way." To the professor, it was theoretical. To the elder, it was actual. His spiritual sight went into the cosmos. He had a gift. He could find water. People would own land. They'd drill wells. They'd come out dry. Elder would come and find, and he became known for this. He could walk the land, see where it was, see how deep it was, and he could taste it. He could taste if it was salty or alkaline or sweet. And when he bought his plot of land for the convent, he walked and he found where it was. An adjoining plot. He had to buy that plot. And fascinating details in his biography. He built a cistern. He first moved on this plot in a trailer and lived there. And gradually people came, and he built a road, and he got approval for the church. But he said he built a cistern, and he gave the cubic meters, and I calculated out 170,000 gallon cistern, collected rainwater. Finally, a man came that he helped, solved family problems, and he said, "Elder, do you need anything here?" He said, "Well, what do you do?" I drill wells." He said, "Yes, I need a well." So he took the man down. He said he was blind by that point, being held by the hand by the sisters. "This is the spot." He drilled and he drilled. He said, "Elder, it's too deep. I'm hitting solid rock." He said, "No, keep drilling. Go get more pipe." They found it. And they pumped it up the hill. I've read miracles from the elder that I've never read anywhere else. One was a bus full of nuns. There was a convent south of Athens. His monastery was north. They were on a trip from somewhere. The abbess decided to stop and get the elder's blessing. A brief stop. But he called them into the trappist and started giving a spiritual talk. And she was very anxious about the trip. It was 4 hours back home. But he deliberately kept going on and on until finally he let them go. And when she started, agitating, "We need to go home." She checked her watch. It was 10 minutes after 8 when they left. And it was 4 hours, and the traffic was heavy through Athens, another hour, and the driver had to stop for fuel. That was another hour, and they had to drop somebody off. It was a 6-hour drive. She expected to get there in the middle of the night. But they roll up, the gates open, the lights are on, and they're starting to serve dinner. And she says, "What's happening? Why aren't you all in bed?" She was very agitated. And the nuns said, "Mother Abbess, look at the time." It was 20 minutes after 8. 6 hours had been compressed to 10 minutes. There was 40 nuns on that bus. It was well attested to. The elder had transcended time and space. And I'll leave you with another miracle I've never read before. There was a woman who had become close to him over the years who moved with her family to Australia. And she was used to calling him every week, or stopping to visit him every week. So every Thursday at 3 o'clock his time, she would call him up and they would talk about her week and he would give her advice. And she called him on Thursday and they had their normal phone call. And he said, "By the way, don't call me anymore." She said, "Why?" "I died on Tuesday." You can't make these things up. But you see, he fulfilled the teaching of the rich young man. He gave everything to the poor. He followed Christ. He had treasure in heaven. He earned money, what to the average person would be wealth. But he passed through the eye of the needle. With man, it's not possible. Under our own power, in our normal everyday life that we think is so inconsequential and prosaic, the spiritual effort of "come follow me" and the essence of that message applies to all of us. He's the most unusual. But the same principles apply. So if he can do it, if he can thread that needle, so can we. Amen.